All right. So good afternoon, everyone. Oh, you guys can do better than that. I know that lunch was good, but good afternoon. All right. Yeah, that's more like it. Thank you for indulging us right after lunch. But I think I'm going to start by introducing myself. This is kind of an interesting setup. I can't see these guys. Maybe I'll move just a little bit. How is that? Yeah, so we can have a conversation, right? Okay, so I'll just quickly introduce myself. I know I was briefly introduced. My name is Lillian Otieno, and I am the director for the Emerging Farmers Office at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. That office is located at the Commissioner's office. And that office is, if you were here earlier at the opening remarks when my boss, Assistant Commissioner Patrice Bailey, who is sitting back there, so no pressure, I'm under evaluation. When you were here earlier, you had him perhaps speak to this office being, we believe, the first of its kind in the country that is working to support emerging farmers. And I'm not going to go into the weeds of some of the challenges that are impacting emerging farmers and why this office is important. But I'm sure you're going to hear from our panelists their stories, and that will give you a good sense of why it is important for us to have this office, and it is important for us to focus on the needs of emerging farmers in Minnesota. And before I continue, I just want to, part of that work would not be possible with also a group that the Assistant Commissioner mentioned, which is our Emerging Farmers Working Group members. And we have a lot of our inaugural members here. We have new members who just joined the fourth cohort and folks who are currently serving. So I'm going to be selfish and just say, if you are an Emerging Farmers Working Group member, please stand up, because I want everyone to see you guys in the room and recognize the work that you guys are doing and have done in advising and providing recommendations. Okay? Could we have the volume a little bit up for the interpreter? So increase. So thank you to those members. And on our panel here, we actually have two inaugural members, Janssen Hang, who's going to introduce himself, and of course, Moses Momanyi as well. Both of them served as a part of that inaugural team in the Emerging Farmers Working Group. So I just wanted to make sure I recognize those folks. And so that's enough about me. Today, we are going to be having a great session here, listening to emerging farmers, some of their challenges, but more so their stories, right? How did they get here? What are some of those challenges in accessing land, if that is indeed their challenges, or in terms of their production or their farming activities right now? What are some of those issues that they still realize with regards to accessing land? All right. So as we get started, I think I want to make sure that in the room we're aware that one of our panelists, Javier Garcia, is having an interpreter who is going to assist in making sure that he can participate and you all can also have that exchange. So we will be minding the flow of how we speak. We're going to try and speak a little bit slower to allow his interpreter to be able to facilitate and provide him immediate interpretation. And Javier's interpreter is Nadia Smith. So thank you so much, Nadia, also for being here. We appreciate you. Okay, so with that, I will start with Javier. Welcome, Javier. And I think we're going to start with first, tell us your name, of course, introduce yourself, but also a little bit about where you actually farm or live, and maybe what you grow or produce. So just briefly on that, and then we'll go into stories after everyone shares that information.
Okay. Buenas tardes primeramente. Mi nombre es Javier Garcia. Yo vengo de Lone Prairie, Minnesota.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I want to share that my name is Javier Garcia, and I come from Lone Prairie, Minnesota.
So, primero en 2012 comenzamos a sembrar un pedacito de tierra de 20 por 20. En el 2012, entonces 2013 empezamos a rentar un poco más como un acre.
So I want to share with you that in 2012, we had a little bit of land that we started working and agriculturally doing stuff there, and the size was 20 by 20. In 2013, we were able to acquire 1 acre.
Ok. Después, en el 2013, empezamos con una cooperativa que se llama Agua Gorda.
So in 2013, we started a co-op and the name is Agua Gorda.
Para formar la cooperativa Agua Gorda tuvimos 8 o 9 miembros.
So to begin our co-op, we started with about 8 to 9 members.
So, para poder trabajar en la cooperativa y estar trabajando bien, tuvimos que aportar $250 cada miembro.
So to be able to form the co-op, each and every one of us had to put $250.
So, eso es para la renta de la tierra, para comprar semillas y material básico para trabajar.
So basically, that money was to buy materials, to buy the tools, and have some seeds.
En 2014, vimos una propiedad junto a la comunidad de Lone Prairie que se vendía, entonces tuvimos acceso con el dueño para preguntar si no la podía vender.
So in 2014, we spot a piece of land that was for sale. So we contact the owner and see if he wanted to sell it to us.
Estuvimos conversando tal vez como medio año y llegamos a un acuerdo que sí, dimos un depósito de $2,500 para amarrar el trato de la tierra.
So we were talking back and forth for about 6 months of 2014, and we put down $205,000 to secure the deal.
Realmente en finales de 2014 se cerró el contrato de la compra de la tierra.
So at the end of 2014, we closed the deal and we bought the land.
La propiedad, la tierra que compramos son de 54 acres.
So the size of the land is 52 acres. Can you hear me well?
54.
54 acres.
Y pues es donde estamos ahorita trabajando. Lo único que estoy sembrando es usando la tierra tal vez como 6, 7 acres solamente.
So, and this is where we are now, and we are using only about 6 to 7 acres.
También quería mencionar, tal vez me van a preguntar dónde agarré el dinero, ¿verdad?
So perhaps you're going to ask me where I got the money, right?
Pues contactamos a la organización de LADC.
So we contact LADC.
Ellos fueron los que nos dieron el crédito para poder comprar esa tierra.
So they gave us some credit to be able to buy that land.
Pues ahora estamos trabajando con ellos en la organización de LEDC. Este año renovamos el contrato con ellos y pedimos un nuevo contrato extra.
So we have been working with LEDC and we renew our contract, and this year we're renewing it again.
El propósito de renovar o pedir otro nuevo contrato es porque yo tengo algún sueño todavía más.
So the reason why renewing the contract with them is because I still have a dream.
LDC tiene algunas fotos que le mandé yo lo que estoy haciendo. Estoy construyendo un barn.
So LEDC has some pictures of what I'm doing these days. And as a matter of fact, we're building a barn.
Y esto quiero usarlo como hay varios retos que tengo, no sé, a ver cuál se me cumple.
So we'll have several challenges, of course, but we'll see which one comes to be true.
Hay la posibilidad de crear pollos.
There's the possibility to raise chicken.
Está la posibilidad de crear borregos.
Also to raise cattle.
O becerritos.
Or baby cows. Calf.
Para mí creo que el proyecto más real es crear los terneritos o becerritos.
So for me, I think one of the dreams to come true is have to raise a little calf.
Porque yo tengo 20 años trabajando en un dairy farm y ese es el trabajo que yo hago, de alimentar becerritos desde el día primero que nacen hasta los 3 meses.
So, and this is basically what I have been doing for 20 years, working at a dairy farm, feeding the calves, baby calves, since day one until they are 3 months old.
Entonces creo que para mí este proyecto de los becerritos es más seguro que los demás.
So it seemed to me like the little calf project is more secure than any other of my projects.
También quería mencionar de la propiedad de Agua Gorda. Antes éramos miembros, más personas. El año pasado todavía habíamos 2 personas. Este año solamente estoy yo.
So I wanted to mention that in the old days we were more people at Agua Gorda. Last year we're just 2 of us left, and nowadays it's just me.
Yeah, and my family, my wife and my sons.
Okay.
Yep.
So did that all?
Yes, that is perfect. Thank you, Javier.
Okay, gracias.
Next, we're going to go to Alex.
Check. Bonjour, Nene Magnedok, Bagwajinini, Dishnakas, Magazine to them, Mesquagame, Zaga, Kening, Donjiba. Hello, everybody. I greet you all as relatives. My English name is Alex Kmett. My Ojibwe name is Bagwajinini. I'm from the Eagle Clan at Red Lake, but I grew up down in the Twin Cities. And now I'm a current resident of Fond du Lac Reservation. Should I just keep going from there?
Yeah, keep going. Take it.
All right, so I myself participate in both traditional and modern food systems work. And I make that distinction because in the context of modern agriculture, modern agriculture here in the upper Midwest is still relatively new when you put it in the context of settler colonialism and native nationhood and everything that's happened here for millennia. Agriculture is still very new. So I myself have been participating in modern food system and our traditional food system has been, I've been doing that for over 10 years, I do not have an exact number by any means. But rather than being on farmland, this takes place on swamps, in the woods, lakes, rivers, and streams, and prairies, both public ceded territories where we retain usufructuary treaty rights to hunt, fish, and gather, as well as on tribal lands as well. Some of the things that I harvest include wild rice, berries, and various medicinal plants as well. I've been using these, essentially it's like value-added products is what we do, but we participate in a tribal gift economy rather than taking it to market. So that kind of runs into some issues with being defined specifically as a farmer, with USDA definitions being tied to economic production, as well as concepts of land stewardship and land ownership. As far as modern food systems with organic agriculture, I engage in that on tribal land as well. At Fond du Lac Reservation, we have a, it's like a community farm called Gitaganing. And over there, there's also a producer training program that serves similarly to an incubator program called the Bagwajinini Producer Training Program, which I've been a part of for the past 3 years or so. That's where I have land access. It's not something that I have to pay for. I just have to commit to organic and regenerative practices. And that's given my family access to about an 1/8 acre. And this past year, also another 1/8 acre that we split with another family in an attempt to grow for a plot full of squash for the Dream of Wild Health's tribal CSA program. But again, we also ran into issues with that with the drought, as you all know, that we all had to face this year. Other things that I grow there besides squash include tobacco, corn, beans, zucchini, tomatoes, tomatillos, peppers. It was a very bad year for peppers this year, and in such a northern climate too, it's very difficult. A number of these are Native American varieties, heirloom varieties of corn, and there's particular challenges there as well in a community farm type of context if you're trying to keep things true to type, which is very important for these ancestral varieties when it comes to the integrity of our food, the integrity of our medicines, etc. Also, my background in starting to care for seeds and care for plants, that really originated when I was still living in the Twin Cities and was engaging in guerrilla gardening just off of trail systems. I was growing cannabis out in the woods. So that's how I got started back in high school. And it really developed my appreciation for plants in general. And even just the prohibition that we faced until recently with that, you know, that's a challenge in and of itself as well. Aside from that, with my land access, my tribe, Red Lake, which is about 3 hours from where I live, has a buffalo herd as well. So I know there was a photograph up there of my daughter and I posing in front of a buffalo that we had just quartered up and everything just a couple weeks ago. I do not own that herd myself. But Red Lake, we're one of 2 tribes in the United States that's a closed reservation. We hold all land in common. And by connection, our buffalo herd also belongs to the people as well. So when we were going in to take one of these buffaloes, a lot of different people from the community, from their schools, even neighboring communities were involved to come out and take part in that because it's a learning process. It's how we keep our culture together. It's how we keep our foodways together. And that food, it doesn't go up for sale. It ends up being redistributed within the community. So it's tied to land access, even though it's not exactly mine there. But wanted to include that since I have it as the picture. So the challenges that I faced have all essentially stemmed from settler colonialism. Obviously, when I lived in the cities, it's difficult to find healthy wild foods and medicines in an urban or suburban environment due to anything from spraying for mosquitoes in wildlife areas, pets coming by and, you know, peeing on the side of the trail, things like that. It becomes much more difficult to find some of the foods that we really, that are part of our culture, and in a way that's still good for our health in that way. Aside from that, I think I already mentioned the difference between farmers and gift economy, the definition of farmer for the USDA. For me, particularly, it's difficult to navigate this entire system due to the cascading effects of dispossession of poverty and the vast differences in understanding between land use and ownership. And also just given the whole economic and power differential between settler colonial communities and native communities, there's this whole mental baggage of, do I go to the pawn shop to buy my stolen goods? And do I suck it up and do that? You know, that's pushing me into further poverty. I'm a survivor of homelessness myself, and I'm not going to risk going back to that. So for me to be asked to take on debt, you know, it's one thing to be told that, you know, sure, we have support systems for you in place, we'll cut you a loan. I don't want to, I'm sure the banks would love that, you know, but I don't, you know, I want to see land returned to Indigenous hands for Indigenous stewardship. However this ends up being, whether it's even shared management. You see this happening with a handful of, Grand Portage National Monument, over at, Redwood Falls, Lower Sioux as well. There's a lot of different instances of things like this happening. In the Duluth area as well, there was a highway construction that was recently disturbed some graves, and as a result of all the blowback that happened with that, with the stroke of the pen, the mayor was able to put that land back in a trust for Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. Like, if you have land, if you have power, if you have agency, there's things that you can do to put this back, you know, without having to go into debt, without having to go into poverty. We can become kin in different ways and take care of each other in different ways. It's not this playing into this zero-sum myth that if by Indian people getting their land back, that we're somehow going to subjugate the rest of the people in the United States. That's a fallacy. We're not going to re-perpetuate those types of injustices. So that's my platform for land back here. And I'll be going way more into all of that history tomorrow with a session that I have tomorrow as well. But in general, while I have everybody here, I would really like to push for protections for native harvesters in particular, and people that are after, native people that are after land. You know, under the 1862 Homestead Act, people were getting land for $1.25 an acre. I'm hearing about tribes now that are trying to get land back acre by acre at prices up to $35,000. So let that sink in. I think that's about all I got. I might be going over. So, thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Alex, for those powerful words. We really appreciate. And I know Alex mentioned something about the drought this year, but actually Minnesota has had experienced drought for the last, 3 years in a row. So yeah, that must be a big challenge for a lot of emerging farmers. So we're going to move on next to Janssen Hang. So Janssen, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Lillian. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Janssen Hang, and I am the Executive Director with the Hmong American Farmers Association, a membership-based nonprofit organization that was created by and also led by Hmong farmers to address the inequity in the food and farming industries around lack of access to land, markets, credit capitals, trainings, and research. The organization's mission of the organization is to advance the economic, social, and cultural prosperity of Hmong American farmers through capacity building, cooperative endeavors, and also advocacy work here to increase farmer self-efficacy as well as to create a pathway to intergenerational and community wealth. I also get the pleasure of sitting over here because I sit on both platforms as the executive director of the organization as well as a farmer who, or an individual who grew up farming. So I get the pleasure of sharing kind of both sides of the stories as well as share the stories of our farmers and our farmer members here. Our family, well, let me take a step back here, give you guys a background, why farming is so essential, right? You know, especially with immigrant refugees coming to the States after the Vietnam War, with the lack of skill sets in this post-industrial society, many of our parents or grandparents reverted back to the traditional practice, which is agriculture, to sustain themselves as well as their family. This is our story. This was my story. This is story is why we farmed and continue to farm to this day, because my parents had always believed that the key to success in the United States is through an education. So our family, we farmed to pay for our private school tuition, and we hated it as children. Right? Classic story, right? Classic story. But little did we know that Hmong farmers, not just my family, but the entire Hmong farming community here in Minnesota were so vital to our local food system, right? They were at the forefront of local food movement here in Minnesota, as well as the revitalizations of the farmers market system, both Minneapolis and St. Paul, making our farmers market here in Twin Cities one of the top farmers market in the nation, right? And so we really want to uplift that narrative, but because of the inequity that exists in the food and farming industry here, that regulated Hmong farmers to more second-class status, primarily because they didn't have land to really grow their produce or grow high premium crop, because they didn't have the market to expand market opportunity beside the farmers market system, because they didn't have access to credit and capital here, that they weren't able to invest in farm assets to make the farm operation more efficient, or the lack of training here so that they can become innovative in the farming practices, right? So while we were going through all of this, and as much as we hated farming, Mom and Dad continued to farm 10 years later after graduating from college. And this wasn't our farming family stories and struggles, but it was the Hmong farming family story struggles, right? And very much like ours, it's around access to land. It's around access to affordable farmland that is near the Twin Cities, near the farmers market here, right? We have heard so many stories, and actual experienced so many stories, even among our families here, around land access and how much of a struggle that was. One, that there was an uncertainty to your farm business operation, not knowing if you have land, because there wasn't an actual written land lease agreement. It was always a verbal contract, right? Because of language barriers that my parents, as well as many other farmers, were very vulnerable and taken advantage of. Hmong farmers were leasing land for $300 to $500 an acre, while their landowner were leasing land to their white owners or neighbors here for no more than $125 an acre. My parents and many Hmong farmers here were leasing land on a verbal contract with conditions that was just extremely absurd. Conditions that would state that, oh, the leasee would allow the owner and his extended family to come out to the field and harvest whatever crops they grow. Or on the conditions that for every 5 crops you grow, I get one of them entirely. So these are some of the struggles around land access. Verbal conditions, high pricings, right? And especially the uncertainty, because it was all verbal, that the landowner could easily just dismantle this verbal contract and say, oh, you know what, I don't want to lease land to you. Maybe, months in advance before the season starts, or sometimes even weeks before the season starts. Right? So it makes it really difficult for Hmong farmers or our families to really hone down on, okay, what is this year's crops going to look like? Or is it going to be sustainable? Or will I even farm with everything that we had made investment on completely just go down south? So that makes it really difficult, right? Those are the challenge of not having certain affordable land access or being vulnerable because of limited English proficiency, right? But needless to say that understanding that dynamic and the challenge that Hmong farmers and my parents were facing here led to the inception of the Hmong American Farmers Association that helped address these struggles and barriers and challenges that Hmong farmers were facing here. And as a result of that, HAFA had secured a 155-acre farm in Dakota County that provide long-term land access, not just in the sense of 5 or 10, but at the same time that we're thinking about building intergenerational wealth where it is a 10-year lease with the option to extend that to another 10, which is another 10, leading to 20, 30, 50, even 60 years of access, right? Not only that, but also provide them with the ability to really hone in on their farm practices, invest into farm assets so they can really build strong farm business operations. Not only that, but they can invest into really being steward of the land and hold on and building, soil health and soil fertility, which is all critical for all of us, especially with climate change, as we had mentioned earlier, that building soil health is another avenue here to really sustain your farm business operation. Right? So land access is critical. Affordable land access to the marketplace is critical, right? And without having long-term land access, that uncertainty is always putting on an edge whether, one, will we remain in farming, two, what will we eat, how will we pay for our mortgage, will we invest, how do I grow my children's, right? There's so many uncertainty in that aspect. We don't have access to affordable land that is close to your market, or let alone to really sustain yourself. And I'll pass the mic.
Keep going. Thank you. Thank you very much, Janssen. Now we'll go to Rachel. Take it away.
My name is Rachel Arneson, and I am a 5th-generation farmer from Northwest Minnesota. I currently raise soybeans, some corn, wheat, and the specialty crop sugar beets. So I feel very strange being on this stage. In most meetings, it's filled with a group of 50-year-old white men or above, and I'm just very grateful to be on such a diverse stage and in a diverse group. So thank you for having me here. But so my historical context for my farm, well, let me back up. This winter is pretty critical for me on my family farm because my dad is retiring. So I am under some stress in hoping that I don't let down 5 generations to continue farming this land. But the historical context for me is it goes back to 1883 when my great-great-grandfather migrated from southeastern Minnesota to Halstead. And in digging through the land abstracts that I've studied just in this past year, it's really interesting to see how he acquired that land and how I can just appreciate that precious resource even more. But the abstracts record the first owner after the federal government, legally as far as the state goes, but the federal government and the state recognizing that they granted this land to railroads to develop infrastructure. So at that time for Minnesota and along the Red River where my land is, that was to develop trade with Canada more so. And in 1883, the railroad had developed up to Halstead, Minnesota. So it was basically the last stop. My great-great-grandfather, Ole Viger, essentially followed the railroad up from southeastern Minnesota where his parents had immigrated from Norway to Halstead. So Ole had 11 children. And what that translates to, I'll skip a couple steps because time is limited, but I farm alongside some of my neighbors are my third cousins. And currently now about just over a third of the land that my dad and I have been farming is owned by my father now. The rest of it is through extended family members, and some more recently, my dad's siblings. So my biggest challenge right now that I'm facing is a lot of landlord education. As landlords become more distant from the land, I mean, we're now 5 generations away from this initial investment. Actually, Ole, I know Alex touched on a little bit of the Homestead Act, but Ole acquired the land from a different landlord who bought it from the railroad. But Ole Viger purchased his first plot of land for $5.60 per acre, which is about $160 in today's value. And boy, would that be awesome if land values were that low now. And speaking on that, I know I'm jumping all over the place, but I returned to the farm about 12 years ago, and just in that time frame, the land values have doubled in Norman County. So that's daunting. So I hope to continue renting from, my dad, that I feel a little bit secure in, but these other landlords, and as I mentioned, landlords that are a little bit farther removed, one of my landlords is a retired farmer, so I feel like he gets it. He treats me pretty well. But I'm having to educate, surprisingly, actually, my dad's siblings more than anybody else. And they're only, one person removed from the farm. So that's been surprising to me. During the distribution of my grandmother's estate, she had in place with my dad a crop share agreement because it was important to her for, I believe, tax purposes to maintain her sort of active farming status. And I'm getting some nods in the audience, so I think some of you are familiar kind of with these tax planning items. And in the distribution of her estate, my dad's siblings sort of inherited that practice of crop share. And while it has a good place for say, those tax planning purposes and retiring farmers who still want to be connected with and active and involved more so, it doesn't make quite as much more sense, in my opinion, for people who are more removed from agriculture, and a very simple cash rent system would be nice in my scenario. But it's hard. Change is hard for people, especially who don't understand sort of the basics to begin with. So I would say that is and has been my biggest challenge. I was actually really hoping when I was when I think it was Bonnie who reached out to me about participating on today's panel. weeks ago, I was like, oh, I'm so excited for this. I'm gonna have these lease agreements finalized by then. Like, it was a really, tough time at that point. I was really, trying to make my case and doing a lot of education at that time with some of my landlords, potential landlords. And I was really looking forward to saying, I did it, you guys. I have not finalized those agreements. So I'm still under a little bit of stress, but I do feel like there is a common understanding that I am carrying on this, family heritage, at least from from when Oli Viker migrated to Halstead, and that I do have their support. It's just sort of the legalese and making sure they're heard. I really appreciated something that Lynn shared in the morning panel about having to revisit some conversations and the patients involved in that. And so that really resounded for me. So I'm hoping that I'm contributing something here, but for the most part, I just feel very heard and valued as part of this summit today. So I'm gonna check my notes, but I think that's it in a nutshell. Yeah. I'll pass the mic.
Thank you, Rachel. And I want you to know that you matter and you deserve to be on this stage, okay? All voices matter, and that is the genesis of this panel, is to show that diversity of farmers, emerging farmers, and folks who actually, you face challenges. The challenges may vary and may be different, levels of degrees or opportunities, but don't feel that you don't belong here, you do belong here. Next, we're going to go to Moses Momanyi from Kilimo. Go ahead, Moses. We speak a similar language, that's why I'm kind of like honing in on him. So go ahead, Moses.
Thank you, Lillian. My name is Moses Momanyi. I am originally from Kenya. I came to this country in 2004. By 2006, I was already, I had already found a plot in Hopkins and had made my mind that I was going to be growing Kenyan greens. I forgot to get a picture of those. But so I went to the city of Hopkins and I got 3 plots. I went there in March, like the very first day they opened for like registration. The second year I did the same, but I did 11 plots. And the third year I did 34 plots. They actually decided to till more space because of that. And I brought my friends also, and they got some plots. The first year they didn't get some plots, so we had to share or something like that. But the second year, the third year, they got a plot of their own. So in the third year, I didn't have the intention of leaving that spot. It was a community plot. But then somehow I took other people's plots and one guy wasn't happy. So that guy told me I should be a farmer. I should go out there and work with other farmers. So I got into my car, I jumped into my car, and I drove about a radius of 30 miles, well, about 30 minutes from Hopkins. That was my goal. And I was just showing up at people's houses and honking, and I was getting all kinds of responses. I wasn't lucky anyway, even though I had said I will see if I see chickens running on the lawn or at the car on the driveway, that's where I'll go. But, you know, it didn't work. So what happened is, as I was just driving, it took me about 2 weeks doing this. So one day I was driving and I just came across a large field, and I saw the Hmong farmers, 2 of them, you know, working on their plots. I slammed on the brake. It was lucky that it was along the highway. I went in, tried to talk to them and ask, you know, who their landlord was, something like that. We didn't communicate. So I drove back, and as I was driving out, that's how I saw a sign written Minnesota Food Association. It wasn't the full name, it was just MFA. But then, you know, Google had arrived, so I went to Google. I asked Google, and they led me to Stillwater. So that was around August. November, I had moved from, like, my lease was ending. I moved to Stillwater. I started living there. And then the following year, I went to Big River Farms because I was determined to, like, farm. My goals were, I'd like to grow on a farm, and then I'd like to raise my children on a farm. Yeah, I'd like to have a farm. I grew up on a farm. So 2 years in Big River Farms, I learned how to grow stuff that I had never grown. I moved on to Wisconsin, just across the river. I rented from connections that I had been connected from Big River Farms. It took me another 3 years. So in total, it took me 7 years to 2014 before I went to the Farm Service Agency and got a farm loan. And then I was able to buy, my wife and me and 2 kids in Cambridge, we bought our farm there. We continued to sell at the farmers market until 2019, when we again made another turn because of the murder of George Floyd and the pandemic. A lot of other gardeners that were from Kenya and Africa in the cities that knew us drove all the way to Cambridge and said, we wanna also farm, we wanna also live on a farm, because we grew up farming in wherever we came from. This is something we can do. So I think at that moment, we also woke up and say, okay, we'll give you a few acres. Each person will get a quarter an acre. We thought we were going to have 5 people. In 2020, we ended up with 13 people. And that has grown now to Kilimo, that she's saying. And we have about over 40 farmers. They are not in Cambridge, that's another story, but we have rented a place in Lino Lakes, and we have started collaborating with other farms to, like, really tackle the land access and the mentoring of we call them emerging farmers, new farmers. So that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, panelists. And I'm sure you're seeing that we're just going to make this flow however it flows, right? And that's the essence of storytelling. But I think in what you have all, the stories that you've had so far, I'm sure you've gleaned in on some of the challenges, some of their journeys on how they got to where they are. And I want you all to just kind of take that in for a moment and don't get caught up on the structure of how we are doing this, because I really want it to be storytelling. I want the panelists to be able to show up the way they want to show up and address what you feel in your heart you want to address. I will just ask you some questions to help guide the storytelling, but don't feel compelled to stick within that those questions, because your voices are very important. So one of the things that I think one of the themes or the narratives that have surfaced in most of your conversations and stories brings to mind what are some of the few things or an item or things that come to mind that would be that needs to be in place for your community or for yourself to realize access to land? And that may sound very simplistic, especially in some of your situations, because you all have very different situations. But think through on what is that one or two things that you probably feel would help in addressing the issues surrounding land access. And if land access is not an issue for you, maybe it's transitions, maybe it's being a landlord. Alex, maybe it's the historical and cultural significance, right, of the issues surrounding colonialism and land for your communities. So I think I'll give you some time. You're good?
Yes, we were just checking the volume.
Okay, you're good. Okay, so we'll. With that, I think. Do you want me to repeat the question?
If you don't mind.
Okay,
I was distracted.
that's fine. We'll repeat that. So I think what we are going to transition to is what is the one thing or one of the most important things that you can think about that would be helpful in addressing access to land for your community, or what does that mean culturally for you and your community? And I think for this segment, I'm going to ask our panelists to limit your responses to maybe 2 minutes so that we can get through to all of you and be able to maybe field more questions. And Javier, you can go first.
Bueno, para mí yo creo que sería bueno que hubiera más organizaciones que dieran apoyo a tener tierra, a más agricultores.
So in my opinion, it would be a great idea to have more organizations that provide that support and help for more people to have access to land.
Ya, en otro es de que pues hay muchas familias que están sirviendo de nuestro trabajo también, entonces tendríamos que apoyarlas también nosotros. Hay familias que tienen, o sea, están sirviendo de nuestros productos, de nuestro trabajo, y ellos necesitan también que uno los apoye, entonces también debemos de apoyar nosotros.
So I think in this cycle is basically the idea that the people that receive or benefit from our products also that if they can support us, but also we can support them. So I think that mutual support and understanding together, it will be a good one thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Javier. Alex, what are your thoughts?
So I have kind of two responses to that. The very first response would be that there needs to be protections for a lot of different producers to make sure that they have access to land at a fair price. Secondarily, especially for indigenous communities, I think a lot of land needs to be returned to indigenous indigenous title and stewardship. If you look at a map, a lot of our reservations are checkerboarded very heavily. Many tribes only own about 15% of our own reservations. So it results in a lot of issues with around jurisdiction, around access to land, fractionated estates. And furthermore, how that happened to begin with is because a lot of this land was deemed surplus land and was then later on auctioned off to either to the state, to the railroads, gifted to universities, essentially appropriated by the state and federal government and then distributed outside of our communities. So we have original borders to our reservations, but our current modern reservation boundaries are not the same as a result of that. And some of that was even just individual Indians were accused of being in debt. So by different traders and things like that. And it's like, well, this person owes me money. So that land was just put up as collateral. So that's how we saw this checkerboarding happened. And it's resulted in a lot of tremendous issues that have just compounded over generations. So.
I would echo Alex about fair pricing. I think that that's critical. Maybe potentially setting a standard across, like what is land rental, land lease pricing, as opposed to price gouging, especially for immigrant minorities or limited English proficiency who are being continued to be exploited. A couple of things would be, one, just creating a bank of potential land that is available across the state, so that farmers would have access to identify, like, whoa, this is close to home, this is what is viable for me, right? Considering that for the most part, many Hmong farmers, they live in Twin Cities and they farm in their first ring suburb, right? And so if you go too far an hour to farm, it doesn't make economic sense for it to make that travel back and forth. 1 to the farm, 2 back home, 3 to the farmer's market, and then back to the farm. The other thing I would say is, look at what is surrounding. One of the biggest challenges that Hafa has right now is eminent domain. We love the freeway system. It's great, to be on the edge of Highway 52, but potential problems of expansions that could encroach into your farm. Right, so if we can put something in place that would preserve farmland, then we can continue to have land access. And then last but not least, what is most important to me is also the fact that having not just access to land, but actually having long-term land access. Because at the end of the day, just having access to land doesn't really justify potential growth in farm business operations here. Instead, it prohibits it and also perpetuates the cycle over again.
What I would contribute would be to acknowledge, I think all of us attribute the high land values to big farms and investors who are able to come in with much larger capital to buy up those acres. But something that gives me some peace is the established community of mid-sized farms around me, and an understanding, even if the landlords around us don't, the actual farmers do. And I'll just tell this brief story. So one of my third cousins, one of his landlords called me up a little over a year ago and said that they were interested in selling their land and would I be interested? And I said, well, it's right by some acres that I already farm, so it's convenient, but what about Kevin? Is he not interested in buying it? And I had a short conversation with her. I think essentially she was just trying to get a sense of what she could get for it in a private sale without necessarily going to auction. And as soon as, that, I was very polite and kind of told her, knowing actually Kevin is we'll just say he's a larger farmer than I am. So if he doesn't have the capital to pay her, then I certainly don't, was sort of what was happening in the back of my head. But I called Kevin after that conversation and just to let him know, I was like, hey, I heard from so-and-so. What's going on there? And he, very politely just told me that, yeah, she's been trying to raise rent for a while now and he's offered and so on and so forth. But there have also been cases in the past. Kevin and I have that relationship where we're very honest with each other if someone approaches us and whatnot, because he's also done the same with me, where one of my landlords has talked to him. So just the mutual respect among farmers in the area is huge. And I think as long as we can have those like private conversations with landlords and with each other before things need to go to auction, there's a chance for the smaller farmers to grow and continue on.
Thank you. I have tried, or I am participating in two options. One is where I would like to create a space where the land seeker and the landowners can sit and drink coffee. And that will be just a small, personal setting. But the way we would start this would be big, maybe national webinar series, and then come down to the local region, where now that the land seeker and the landowner have known each other, then they can, say, hey, I have been thinking of transitioning my land. I would like to participate in this. So that is one thought that we've been having. Another one is collective land access. Collective land access, there are different models for that, but with that and, easements and other types of programs, those can enable, land seekers be able to get to land that is highly priced and out of reach. But of course, as they all said, most of the land that is out there is already the landowner has exhausted other ways, and now they are, they're putting it out in the market. So the land seeker who is going out to the realtor to look for land and all that is always like at the end of the, when all the other options have been exhausted, that include fair pricing. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think at this point, we're going to switch it up a little bit. So I'm going to open it up for questions. If you have any questions for the panelists, I think we've heard a lot of good information, especially in this last segment, from ideas like more organizations, protections for producers, long-term land access, looking at ways to address land use, eminent domain, land preservation, and networking, perhaps bringing those, harnessing those relationships and making sure those relationships work for buyers and owners. If you have a question, I'd encourage you guys to just write your questions, but at this point, if you want to just raise your hand and we'll take that first question, so we give our panelists some time. So Sarah's going to bring the pink Post-it.
We're collecting Post-its, so if you have, do you want?
She raised her hand first. She had a pink Post-it.
Okay, so I'll do this in both Spanish and English just to make it easier. Entonces, Hoy hemos hablado un montón de este tema de nuestros ancestros. Today we've talked a lot about this theme of our ancestors. Y hay un dicho en español que es como nosotros somos el resultado de nuestros ancestros. So there's a saying that we are the result of our ancestors, that we sort of carry what they've left with us. Entonces, a la vez que estamos intentando pensar en el pasado, también estamos influyendo el futuro. So at the same time that we are thinking about the past, we also are influencing the future. Entonces mi pregunta es, si solo hay como una verdad que se puede compartir con los ancestros de, no sé, como el futuro, ¿cuál sería? Como solo una verdad. So if there is only one thing that you could leave to your ancestors, one truth, what would that be?
Did you want to direct it to anyone in particular or all the panelists?
Anyone who is willing.
Anyone who's willing. Okay, who wants to take Emily on that question? Okay, I'm gonna pick. Okay, Javier, do you want to take that question? Okay, go ahead.
Bueno, gracias, Emily. Yo pues, conozco bien a Emily también, ¿verdad? A varios que están aquí. Pues no me quedó muy clara la pregunta, pero porque pues, mis ancestros, no, yo no tengo más familia de pasados aquí, ¿no? Pero pues me gustaría compartir lo que ellos me enseñaron a mí también.
So I thank you, Emily, for your question. I know Emily and several of you here, so it's good to see you, Emily. And as a matter of fact, I don't have any of my ancestors here. So it's hard for me to think about how to respond to that question, and I'm not quite sure that I understood your question.
I can take that one. I think I kind of understood the question a little bit differently in terms of what could you leave for your descendants. So in Ojibwe culture, we have this this concept of Anuko Bichikan, like our great grandparent or great grandchild, and it's essentially it translates to somebody that you're intrinsically connected to intergenerationally, just throughout that chain. So we're often told that with any decisions that we make throughout our life, we should consider 7 generations behind us, what our ancestors were doing, and consider 7 generations ahead of us to inform our decisions and our approach. So with that, I think time is kind of an illusion. My people, we followed cyclical ways of life for millennia. So when I think about what my ancestors were doing, it's the same things that I'm trying to do and that I'm trying to carry on. And I'm trying to have my children understand all of that too, whether it's their food system. Essentially, as Anishinaabe people, we're intrinsically connected to the land. Our language is connected to the land. Our ways of knowing, all of that is connected to the land. So essentially, we are the land itself. So I want to see that our ways of knowing, our food systems and all that, that those are going to continue on. So I instill those within my children as well.
I'll just our ancestors have, relationship with land was collective, and I would think about what can be done collectively in respect to land. That would be my response.
Anybody else on the panel want to take that? Okay, I'll read the next question. So, and I think this is an interesting question that I was actually going to ask this question, so thank you for submitting this. If there was land that's available for you and your community to access in more further rural areas, right, than perhaps the outskirts of the metro areas, because I think we do, we do hear that a lot. I think, Janssen, you mentioned that, that folks sometimes prefer land that is more closer to the metro areas for various reasons. But if there was land that was available further out, what are the needs of you and your community that you feel is necessary for you to be successful and comfortable in those lands within the rural areas? I think I put you on the spot.
Yeah, I feel targeted here.
I got my eye on you, Janssen.
Yeah, truly, there's no objection in farming in rural area. I think that for the most part is having the infrastructure to support that, the farming community in rural area, whether that's a market, whether that's a food hub, so that they can truly sustain themselves. I have heard stories that farmers are traveling 3-4 miles to drop off produce in the Twin Cities Mountain and Twin Cities metropolitan area, right? And I'm just thinking about the prices of gas. So you're not driving a small Toyota Corolla that gives you 35 miles per gallon. You're driving a huge box truck that you're getting about 9 miles per gallon. And the price of gases and diesels is just sky high, that it just doesn't make economic sense. I think that's the biggest struggle there. And at the end of the day, you think about that, is it sustainable, right? So creating the infrastructure in rural areas and farming rural area, and I think at the end of the day here that we're creating a vibrant local economy in that area as well. Right?
Thank you. Does anyone want to take that question as well? If there was land outside in the rural area, what would that mean to your community for you to be successful or to feel comfortable in accessing that land? We're good? we can move on. If
Sure, I can take
take it, Alex.
So within Minnesota, majority of our reservations are within rural areas as well. And all of the land within Minnesota is in various different treaty territories it's land that was ceded by Indian tribes by treaty to the federal government at some point or another. To get some of that back, no matter where it is, could be tremendous. The economic impact that it could make, whether it was farmland, whether it's being used for traditional food systems, for hunting, fishing, and gathering, whether it's used for instance, a processing facility for wild rice or for maple syrup, even if it was developed economically for even just a gas station, the impact that can create on tribal economies is tremendous. So yes, no matter where it is.
All right, thank you. I have a question here that was specifically addressed to Rachel. So, Rachel, what are challenges of community of related landlords, especially what has worked? What are thoughts for generations following you?
I don't know if I understand the question. Could I look at it? What are challenges of community of related landlords? Especially what has worked. What are the thoughts for generations following you? Man, there's so many ways I could answer this. Find me later is my answer to that. I think one of the biggest challenges, something that my aunt communicated to me quite recently, was she feels so alone in negotiating. I put that in air quotes because it's really just a discussion. But she feels so alone because prior to this, she's in her 70s right now. And prior to this, her brother and her mother were in this crop share agreement, and everything was just handled, and that's the way that it was done. And she was fine with accepting that because it was almost peer reviewed in that sense. And now I've sort of flipped her world upside down by proposing a different way of land rent. So she doesn't feel like she has that community that you actually referred to it as of relatives. But I'm trying to encourage her, you know, to lean on that extended community of the extended family that are already landlords who feel more confident and comfortable in looking at things differently. So I think I don't really know if that answers your question, but those are some of the challenges where my eyes are being opened a little bit more to the position that she's in as a landlord, where she didn't necessarily, you know, go out and buy this land. She didn't seek out this investment. It's something that she feels that she needs to steward wisely.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Okay, so thank you, Rachel. I'm gonna ask this question now of all of you. How do we engage, and this is from the audience, how do we engage more, I'm gonna read in verbatim, how do we engage more minority groups to be part of events or groups to continue to hear their opinions within agriculture? I think I understand this question because in the line of work that I do, engaging with a lot of emerging farmers, farmers of color, new Americans, but all groups of, you know, emerging farmers, sometimes we don't see that representation, right? And sometimes it's a few folks who are willing to participate and to show up. So do you all have any ideas on how, I'm thinking this question is asking, how do we get more of your communities to participate in these events and be able to share their stories, but also to be visible so that, you know, folks know that we exist, you exist, and your stories matter. So I think I'll start with Javier.
Bueno, yo pienso que podemos tener más comunicación en la comunidad también.
Well, I think first of all, it will be having more communication with with our communities.
Y hablar sobre lo que estamos haciendo en la comunidad también.
Also, let them know what we're doing in these communities, and also let us know in our communities what are you doing.
Y darles a conocer también de los eventos que estamos teniendo acá en la ciudad o en diferentes puntos de Minnesota también.
And of course, outreach to publicize more of these events, not only in the cities, but also outside of the cities.
Y creo que eso es nada más.
I think that's what I can say.
Thank you, Javier.
I'd also like to echo what Javier says as well. Going out to our communities and doing that outreach is tremendous. And also I think, like I mentioned earlier, in Indian country, most of our reservations are in very rural areas. And we are also quite often the largest employer within our respective counties. And we often have things like ballrooms and event centers and things like that within our community. So we can help to host events like this too, or gladly rent out our ballroom, things like that. And that would help to get that message out into our communities, but also eliminate some of the costs that are involved. Because like say for me, and for instance, for me to be here, I'm taking time off of work. I'm not being reimbursed my full daily wages, but I believe in the message that I'm here to bring, so that's why I'm here. So, but if we can eliminate some of those costs or some of those barriers, whether that's providing support for people to come in or to bring the platform right to them, those are different ways to engage the community as well.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, I think it was very well answered. If I may add, the other question is how do we get communities of color engaged in conversation, right? Maybe I'd like to flip the question around is how are we engaging with communities of colors and BIPOC farmers or emerging farmers, right? The biggest thing that I know that for immigrant refugees is a level of trust. And if you expect that, oh, why don't you just come? Where's that level of trust that I feel comfortable them coming to the space, that I feel empowered as opposed to coming to the space and being tokenized? So maybe that's just a thought, is how do we do it, is to be very intentional. It's about relationship building. And then, once we've established that engagement will just be flawless.
Thank you, Janssen.
I echo the same sentiment. I just think back when I first returned to the farm and I started showing up to some meetings in order to become better educated myself. There were some significant people who I consider very good mentors now who sort of took me under their wing and encouraged me. And I often think, how can I turn around and do the same thing now? I'm still considered a young farmer, but I'm encouraged by seeing younger people than myself interested in showing up, and how can I be an encouragement to them? So yeah, that's all that I would add on to his comment.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, I think, like I had tried to say before, creating the space, I think Janssen has said that too, will create trust. One thought that came to my mind is the definition of a farmer, and when we try to think of somebody doing community food plots, and we go to zoning and they are like, okay, it has to be 10 acres to be farm and all those things. Some of those things, somebody will just think, I'm not a farmer. But I would say in my community, since it's a new community in this space, most of them are working. Most of them are still learning about this, the whole landscape of farming, and just finding ways to engage in smaller groups, farm tours, conferences, all these things. And at some point when we have more and more people owning land and being farmers full-time, they do have more time to attend to events like this. If it's a Sunday evening or a Saturday evening, they'll be here, maybe. But during the week, maybe they're working. Yeah, so I believe it will grow, but I think the more effort is on, the landowners to make, an effort to find out who are these farmers, who is looking for land, and to be an ambassador for the emerging farmer. Thank you.
Thank you. And looking at time, I'm just going to ask you all just one word answer. One word. I'm looking at Janssen and Moses. One word. I'm picking on them because I've worked with them a lot. If you can just summarize your experience, your story, this session, this platform, this environment. I know, right? One word. We'll start with Moses.
What do you want one word for?
There he
what?
is, it's already over.
What is your experience? If you think of just one word that can describe your experience, or where you are right now, or how you're feeling, or the conversation you've just had, we've all just had, what one word comes to mind? Moses, you know you're my brother, so I'm gonna. Okay, we're gonna go to Rachel.
Responsibility.
I don't know if I can do one word, but I would say collective power.
Miigwetchiwe'indamoan. It's gratitude.
Responsabilidad.
Responsibility.
Oh.
You know, for me, I have to think in Swahili and then say it in English. So, new friend, I don't know, we have one word for new friend.
Okay, it's one word. It's actually two words in Swahili, but okay. All right, so please give these guys a round of applause. I just want to say thank you. Thank you to each and every one of you. You represent what Minnesota agriculture is. And I just want you all to know that what you are doing is also part of the agricultural economy of this state. It may look small to some, but it is important because all of you are representing a lot of us, and you're representing a lot of folks who perhaps never imagined that they would have this spotlight or this stage to talk about what you are doing. A lot of folks are interested in where their food comes from. A lot of folks are interested in the new products and palettes that you're introducing to us. A lot of folks are interested in learning our histories, where we came from, the land issues, right? The historical context of this country and other nations. So I want you all to leave this knowing that we see you, you matter, you're very important. And finally, I want to plug the Emerging Farmers Office at the Department of Agriculture. I had to do that. That office was established to make sure that we are listening to your needs, that we are working together to advance your needs, either through policy, legislation, or just internally to look inward at our processes, our programs to make sure that we are addressing your needs. We are not perfect. I think we heard from the administrator today, USDA administrator, who gave us a very powerful speech. And it, in my mind, at least from where I'm sitting, I think there's a lot of goodwill out there. Folks are trying. We're not perfect. We still have a long way to go. But I want to encourage you all to continue doing what you're doing and continue being the champions that you are. And I'm just honored to have been able to moderate this panel on behalf of this conference. So thank you all very much.